Hello everyone, this is Dr. Roger Paul, and this is the 5th Epical Revelation Fellowship Study Group. Tonight we're going to study the Urantia book, paper 64, The Evolutionary Races of Color. And that starts on page 718, or paper 6401. And let's say a little prayer and we'll get started. Rodney, would you start us out with a prayer tonight?
Sure. Heavenly Father, we are very happy that we can meet tonight to study this great revelation that has been given to us. And we pray for our government leaders and judges and officials of the United States that they make good decisions that will benefit not only us Americans, but the whole world. We pray that we have insight into what we're going to read, and that we can share this in an intelligent way with other people. And we pray for all this in your will, Father. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so we can get started here. I want to especially thank Don Estes tonight. I used several of his illustrations from his chart. The origin, history, and destiny of universe reality in this paper. And I also used a couple illustrations from square circles in another Urantia website that's got the link on our website. Their link is out there. It's got a lot of information about this. And this is from the Don Estes chart right here. And this shows basically all the colored races, and we're going to go through all of this tonight from Andon and Fonta, the Andonite race, to the Bandanon tribes, the Java man, Foxhall peoples, the Heidelberg race, and the Neanderthal man. We're going to talk about all of these tonight, and that's on this chart also. And then we're going to get into the 6 evolutionary races of color, the Sangic races, and those are the yellow race, red race, blue race, orange race, green race, and indigo race. And we'll get into later on the violet race with Adam and Eve. So we'll cover all this very well. Okay, and these are on basically on the slides for tonight's meeting. And this is the mixed races. This is another piece of that chart. And it talks about the 5 original skeletal types. And this is important because as we dig up fossils and things like this, we find the different types of skeletal types. And this is how they relate to the different races. Like, for instance, the Adamites, the violet race. The Nodites, the descendants of the Dalmatians, okay? And the secondary Sandic, orange, green, and indigo. The primary Sandic, red, blue, and yellow. And the Andonic Urantia Aborigines, right? And then it talks about the 3 modern-day skeletal types. That's now. And we have the Caucasoid, the Mongoloid, and the Negroid. And the Caucasoids is a mixture of the Andite, the Adamite, and the Nodite. Okay, the Mongoloid primary Sangic type, and that would include the Eskimos and things like that. And the Negroid, the secondary Sangic type, and that would be all the secondary Sangic colors like orange, green, and indigo. Of course, the orange and the green have been wiped out completely and absorbed by the indigo now. But this is still, the skeletal types are still different. Even up through today, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit later on page 904. Okay, so let's get started. These are interesting things to look up. We could spend 2 or 3 months just on this one paper, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to get to it tonight if we can. But there's a lot of information. You can trace all these things back through time if you choose to do so. All right, Millie, would you like to start us out tonight?
Yes, I'll start it. Paper 64, The Evolutionary Races of Color. This is the story of the evolutionary races of Urantia from the days of Andon and Fonta almost 1 million years ago, down through the times of the planetary prince to the end of the Ice Age.
Okay, so we've only been around almost 1 million years now, right? All right, so. All right. Tim, would you take the next one, please, sir?
The human race is almost 1 billion years old, and the first half of its story roughly corresponds to the pre-planetary prince days of Urantia. The later half of the history of mankind begins at the time of the arrival of the planetary prince and the appearance of the 6 colored races. It roughly corresponds to the period commonly regarded as the Old Stone Age.
Okay, so the planetary prince arrived around what we consider the Stone Age. So human beings were here on this planet 500,000 years before the arrival of the planetary prince. Okay, so it's only been 500,000 years, or around 500,000 years, that since the planetary prince arrived, right? So the first half of the million years that we've been on this planet was before the planetary prince, and the second half was after the planetary prince. So up until the arrival of the planetary prince, there pretty much was the offshoots of these different original types of lemur type beings or humans that came from Andon and Fonta. Of course, there's a lot of variations of this because they mixed, some of them went back and mixed with the apes and the gibbons and things like that. So, and that's how we ended up with the Neanderthal stock and things like that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later tonight. But it wasn't until the first Sangic family that had all 6 colored races at the same time, 19 children, that the planetary prince actually came. So that happened about the same time as the arrival of the planetary prince. All right, so let's get started on
The arrival of what?
the planetary prince.
No, that happened about the same time
As the arrival of the 6 colored races. They all came.
Okay, got it.
They all came from the same family. All
You
19.
put something down was being thought I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There were
So
19.
it was, you're saying it was about the same time.
Not exactly the same time, but around that same time,
I
probably.
mean, does it go into detail?
Yeah, I think he arrived shortly after the 6 races, if I remember correctly.
Okay, shortly after. Okay.
Yeah, I think that was the case.
Hmm.
All right, and there were 19 children of the original colored races. All 6 colored races were 19 children, all coming from the same family, and it's going to break those down tonight in this paper for us. Okay. All right. So, Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
All right, Roger. Making a note here. Number 1, the Adonic Aborigines.
Aborigines.
Primitive man made his evolutionary appearance on Earth a little less than 1 million years ago, and he had a vigorous experience. He instinctively sought to escape the danger of mingling with the inferior simian tribes, and he could not migrate eastward because of the arid
Tibetan land.
Tibetan, you're right, land elevations, 30,000 feet above sea level. Neither could he go south nor west because of the expanded Mediterranean Sea, which then extended eastward to the Indian Ocean. And as he went north, he encountered the advancing ice. But even when further, migration was blocked by the ice, and though the dispersing tribes became increasingly hostile, the more intelligent groups never entertained the idea of going southward to live among their hairy, tree-dwelling cousins of inferior intellect.
Okay, this is the early primitive man, right? This is the first generations of the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Andon and Fonta, right?
Andon and Fonta.
Right.
Okay.
Hey, Roger, what do you know about the Simian tribes?
All right, the simian tribes, basically, we're talking about the all groups of monkeys, and that's what this basically chart here is talking about. It's small because it's hard to read, but when you download this, you'll be able to read it pretty well. Okay, and it says down here, these include the pre-simian ancestors were apes, gibbons, monkey-like creatures, it says. And these are the interceding produced the other simian tribes, right? And that included, it talks about here, mammals being the gorillas, chimpanzees, baboons, and monkeys, okay? And then it has the dawn mammal here. It starts out with this placental mammal, goes to the ancestral lemur. Okay, that's where we broke off, right? And then it talks about the mid mammals and the primates. And in this flourishing of the types of monkeys and apes and things like that, the lemur came about. And the lemur was our pre-human, or the pre-mammal that Andon and Fonda came from, and they were considered the first humans, right? The problem was many of their descendants, or the early tribes, went back and mixed with some of the simians, you know, like the gorillas and apes. You know, they would have sex with them and things, and they would produce offsprings. So some of the missing link that we keep looking for in science, okay, that they keep looking for this missing link between apes and monkeys and man, this missing link does not exist. Let me tell you why. Because the human being, the human race, basically was an off branch of a lemur type creature that turns into mammal, and there was this great leap that turned into humans. Okay? And the problem comes in with this. Many of the descendants of Andon and Fonta, when they got broken off from the main group of tribes and stuff, would go back and start their own tribes. And some of them ended up mixing with the early simians, the monkeys and the baboons and apes. And the children that were born from that ended up becoming part of the Neanderthal stock, or the Neanderthal man. So it was a step back for humans. You follow me? And that's what many of the Java men, Foxhound peoples, the Heidelberg race, the Bandanan tribes, and that all added to what's considered the Neanderthal man. And the Neanderthal man, this was during the Ice Age, right before the planetary prince. The first 500,000 years, the Neanderthal men, along with what? The first humans populated the planet. Okay? So the Neanderthals were around for about 500,000 years. And some of those Neanderthals had the stock in the downstepping of the blood from the simians. Okay? And that's where the problem comes in. That's why when we dig up bones, we find human beings or the Neanderthals with the heavy foreheads. They look a lot like apes because they have ape blood in them. You follow me? So that would be what we would consider the missing link, but really there is no missing link. The problem was human beings branched off, and then some of these human beings went back and mixed with the simians and messed up the human bloodline. You follow me? Am I confusing everybody? But that's what this chart's all about. And eventually, the Bandanan tribes, from the Andonite race came the Bandanan tribes, and from that came the 6 colored races, or the Sangic race. And it was from the Sangic race that all 6 colors of the human stock appeared. Okay? So that's our heritage right there. The problem is when these colored races came along, there were still many of these Neanderthal people around. So the colored races, many of them mixed with these Neanderthal people before they disappeared, right? So we have a mixture of blood throughout all of us. Doesn't sound like a pretty picture, does it? And it wasn't until the appearance of Adam and Eve where the violet blood upstepped the Sangic races that we started to get more and more better stock in human beings. So a lot of our problems with backwardness and people and barbarian comes from our own heritage with the Neanderthals. Okay? Because the original Andinite race, when they were, some of them were cut off from the rest of everyone else. There was some of them that ended up, I think it was in Tibet. They were the only ones that didn't do human sacrifice, because they had the morals and the values of the teachers that had come along over that 500,000 year period.
Hey, Roger.
Yeah.
Just to give everybody a clue, when you say the word Andinites, they are the descendants of Andon and Fanta, correct?
That's right. That's correct.
So what exactly does 21st century science argue against? What's their take on it?
They're looking for a missing link between Neanderthal man. Actually, they think it's the Foxhall peoples and the Java man. Actually, Java man was just discovered, I think, 30 years ago. Or no, it was more than that. It was more like 50 years ago. But they think that there's a missing link between monkeys and Neanderthals, because Neanderthals look so much like monkeys, right? With the heavy foreheads and the long jaws, and that they look like apes' heads, ape skeletons, a lot.
So that the monkeys mated with the Neanderthals?
Neanderthals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some of them did. Some of them went back and mated with simian tribes. In other words, some of the Neanderthal men that were hunters and things like that could not find, there weren't enough women, okay? They were hunters, basically. And the better the hunter, the more chance that you would get one of the women. Your reward for being a good hunter as a Neanderthal was you're allowed to pick from your choice of the women, right? And so many of these men could not find women because they weren't good hunters, okay? So because they had this sex urge, they went back and mated with the monkeys. Basically, it's not a pretty picture. It's not something you'd think is anything to do with religion, but it has. And science tries to connect this Neanderthal with the monkeys. And the problem is there isn't a big jump from the monkeys to the Neanderthal. There's no link there. Okay? The reason the Neanderthals looked a lot like the monkeys is because they went back and mated early on with the simian tribes. Okay, the monkeys. So that's the way it worked. Did I confuse the issue or help out a little bit? I hope that helps out a little bit. Okay, let's keep going. Just something else here. All right. No, I can't remember. I think it's you guys.
Many of man's earliest religious emotions grew out of his feeling of helplessness in the shut-in environment of his geographic situation. Mountains to the right, water to the left, and ice in front. But these progressive Andinites would not turn back to their inferior tree-dwelling relatives in the south.
All right, who are the tree-dwelling relatives? That's the monkeys and apes and gibbons and things like that, right? Okay. Ooh, just killed my home. These Andalites avoided the trees in contrast with their habitats of the non-human relatives. The forest man has always deteriorated. Human evolution has made progress only in the open in the higher latitudes. The cold and hunger of the open land stimulates action, inventions, and resourcefulness. While these Andinite tribes were developing the pioneers of the present human race, amidst the hardships and the privations of the rugged northern climates, their backward cousins were luxuriating in the southern tropical forests of the land of their early common origin. Who are they talking about here? They're talking about the Andinites, who are more human, started going to the open land, right? The treetops, the open land, things that they could see out open and they could survive. The monkeys, the gibbons, and all the rest of them stayed where? In the forest, because they were mostly vegetarian and they could forage for food, and they could kill other animals to eat the meat, right? So that's why they stayed in the forest.
So hey Roger, to really give me an idea of what's going on, if we started with the life carriers, how they came down to Urantia and pretty much didn't use anything but what the planet had and that spark of life from the Divine Mother Spirit,
Right.
and everything kind of took off and mutated from there, right?
That's right.
And then
Everything-
I'm kind of, I'm kind of new at this, you might say, but from there, what happens next? I mean, can you give me, if you have time, a clear picture? I mean, from that, everything started to mutate, and then, I mean, we know about Andon and Fanta, but can you take it from there just real briefly, like?
Yeah, I'll give you a brief overview, Tim. Basically what the life carriers did is they took the DNA and all the electrochemical stuff on this planet and created the DNA for every type of creature on the planet, okay? And put it in this big mush, or what they'd call a plasm or a plasma or whatever you want to call it. It's basically a big gooey gob of material, right? And they implant it in the ocean, and from that point on, evolution takes over. And the DNA there is, and the makeup and the DNA and the beginning of all life on the planet emerges from this implantation they do at 3 different locations, right? And from there, evolution takes over. From there, everything just starts to evolve, and it's really the selection of the fittest. A lot like who was it that in the 50s was a big thing? I can't think of his name. I'm drawing a blank.
Darwin.
Darwin's theory. It was pretty close to being correct, except with the evolving of human beings. Everything else was pretty much on track, and basically all life started evolving, and the survival of the fittest, or the survival of the smartest creatures, humans, plants, animals, things like that. That's what survived, and that's what has evolved. And that's where human beings came from, basically. It's from the life implantation. If there had not been this life plasm that had been implanted, then evolution on this planet would not have started. This planet would have been rock and mud and water and everything, but without that life force to start everything out, nothing would exist, basically. Does that make sense?
So basically then, we start with the lemurs and how they evolved, and then you have these two almost like human beings, like Andon and Fanta.
Yeah, they
and that's
were
where it
human
really
beings.
started to take off, correct?
That's right. They were the original human beings. If you saw Andon and Fanta, except for the fact that they were smaller than we were, maybe had a little bit more hair, they looked pretty much like we do today. Their skeletal structure was pretty much like we do today. The confusion comes in, Tim, when we start digging up fossils of other types of humans. We have the mixture of not only the descendants of Andon and Fanta, but we have the mixture of the Neanderthals, right? And the trouble with the Neanderthals is the fact that they had mixed early on with some of the simians, right?
That's correct. So basically, Andon and Fanta, they had children, correct?
They had
and then
children.
eventually these children mated with some of these other mammals, which kind of screwed up all the DNA and the progress.
Yeah, it was a backstepping of the human evolution is what it was.
Okay, so this is basically where we're at right now.
Yeah, this is what we're talking about right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Big help.
All right. Keep going. I think, Mom, would you want to read it? No. I think, Millie, you're back out.
Dustin was up.
Oh, yeah, Dustin. Don't let me forget Dustin. I'm sorry. Y'all remind me he's out there. Dustin, would you read the next one, please, sir?
I surely shall.
All right.
These events occurred during the times of the third glacier. The first, according to the reckoning of geologists. The first two glaciers were not extensive in northern Europe. During most of the Ice Age, England was...
Okay, you skipped over another paragraph here. Let me talk about this a little bit before you go on, Dustin. All right, they're talking about the third glacier here, right? According to the Urantia book. According to scientists, they think that is the first glacier, okay? So according to scientists, the first glacier is the third glacier according to the Urantia book. There were two previous glaciers they talk about in the Urantia book before this first glacier we have in mind. Now, the fourth and fifth glaciers are the other two glaciers that scientists talk about in our days. Okay, so according to our scientists, there's only been 3 glaciers, but according to the Urantia book, there's been 5. So they start counting on the third one, and then they progressively go on from there. Okay.
Hey Roger, what do these glaciers have to do with? It's a block of ice floating down the river.
No, they're not. They're the growing of large blocks of ice or snow or whatever, accumulations that grow over long periods of time. Okay?
Tim,
Yeah.
see, so much snow falls that the weight becomes tremendous. It condenses very thick, like in the ice.
Yeah,
It
pressurized.
becomes so heavy that it starts pushing. Gravity pulls it, and it actually starts pushing through the valleys and over the lower terrain, and it just destroys anything in sight.
Correct, because when you say glacier, I think of Alaska.
Yeah.
About a big ice cube, like in the water.
Well, these
That's the very end of it.
yeah, these glaciers grow over thousands of years and get larger and larger and larger, and then
Yeah,
they
they're-
retract for thousands of years.
And these
They're like,
glaciers are.
rivers of ice.
Did they say they're in America, or it says
No.
northern? Okay, Europe. That's
Europe.
correct.
Yeah, yeah. It's all part of the same, most of the same ice pack that we consider the Arctica, right? Arctic.
Yeah, I was just wondering what a glacier had to do with, what we're reading about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what it has to do with what we're reading about is the story of human beings follow the line of the expansion and the retraction of those glaciers. So population follows this glacier line down and back up 3 times. Okay, that's why it's important.
Okay, thank you, Roger.
Yeah, Tim, it was almost as if the polar cap had grown tremendously
Yeah,
across all of, covered Canada completely, pushing its way down into America and in other parts of the world.
And that's going to create like a path where they can travel.
that's
pretty
right.
much.
Well, they
I see.
can't, they don't really travel on the glacier, along the edge of it.
And along
Exactly.
the edge, the land bridges and things like that's created because of the Great Glacier.
Well, it enables man to pretty much, walk about instead of just staying in one little continent, correct?
That's exactly correct. It's from the retractions and the expansions of the glaciers that human beings ended up in North America, South America, Central America, in Asia, all over the world. Basically, it was the lines of these glaciers that, as these glaciers retracted, they would go across land bridges that would come up and things like that to get in a whole new continent. The red man literally created the population of Indians in North America, South America, and Central America from this movement of the glaciers. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Rodney and Roger.
Sure. Dustin, you want to take that next paragraph too, and then we'll get somebody else to do the next one.
He actually stepped out for me.
Oh, did he? Okay, well let's keep going. And Rodney, would you like to take the next one?
Me? Yeah, okay. Well,
Is that who's next? No.
I'm not next. I think Millie is, and then Tim.
Oh, okay, Millie, would you take the next one? Then? Hello, Millie. Yeah.
During most of the Ice Age, England was connected by land with France, with later on Africa was joined to Europe by the Sicilian land bridge. At the time of the Adanic migrations, there was continuous land path from England in the west on through Europe and Asia to Java in the east, but Australia was again isolated, which further insinuated the development of its own peculiar fauna.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
All right, so Australia was cut off from the rest of the continent, in other words, right?
What's a fauna?
That's basically all the greenery, trees, shrubs, and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Roger,
Yeah.
Java, where is Java?
Java would be considered part of like, oh gosh, that would be south of Asia. That would include
Like the Philippines and
Philippines, Korea,
Thailand.
Philippines, yeah, all the islands down through there.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Rodney, I think you're next now.
All right. 950,000 years ago, the descendants of Andon and Fanta had migrated far to the east and to the west. To the west, they passed over Europe to France and England. In later times, they penetrated eastward as far as Java, where their bones were so recently found, the so-called Java men, and then journeyed on to Tasmania.
Remember that chart we had earlier? Java Man was mentioned on that because of that find.
So they must have found Java Man back in
Yeah,
19...
30 something, 34, 35,
Okay.
something like that. Yeah. Hard to believe that's so far back. That's 80 some years ago. Think about it. All right. Okay. Oh, sorry.
The groups going west became less contaminated with the backward stocks of mutual ancestral origin than those going mingled so freely with their retarded animal cousins. These unprogressive individuals drifted southward and presently mated with the inferior tribes. Later on, increasing numbers of their mongrel descendants returned to the north to mate with the rapidly expanding Andonic people, and such unfortunate unions unfailingly deteriorated the superior stock. Fewer and fewer of the primitive settlements maintained the worship of the breath giver. This early dawn civilization was threatened with extinction.
That's because of their backward ways, right? They weren't as intelligent because of mixing with the inferior stocks, things like that. And so they almost literally got wiped out by the other tribes. And thus it has ever been on your ranches. Civilizations of great promise has successively deteriorated and have finally been extinguished by the folly of allowing the superior freely to procreate with the inferior. Okay, remember when we studied about 4 years ago Adam and Eve, and their job was to uplift the human stock with the violet race? That's what they're talking about here. They're trying to uplift the human stock to make us better. All right?
You know, Roger, that's actually the first mention where they say the breath giver.
Yes?
Is that in reference to the universal Father?
That's in reference to the universal Father. That's right. There were three great teachers in the first 500,000 years, and all of them taught a different concept of one universal God or one universal Father. Right?
Okay, thank you.
Roger,
Yeah.
a guy would think, as many worlds as have been populated in the universes, that this is probably pretty common.
Yes, it is, Rodney. This is the same sort of thing that's allowed to happen on almost every single planet, if you think about it. There are probably exceptions because we are an experimental planet, but probably most populated planets are allowed to evolve in much the same way as we did. really. So, all right. Let's see. Millie, are you out there?
No, I think it's Dustin's.
Oh, is it Dustin's turn next? Okay,
Yeah.
Dustin, are you out there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Foxhall peoples.
2. The Foxhall peoples. 900,000 years ago, the arts of Anon Infanta and the culture of Onagar were vanishing from the face of the earth. Culture, religion, and even flintworking were at their lowest ebb.
Yep, the lowest ebb. Now, what are they talking about the arts of Andan Fanta? They're talking about the ability to work with flint, create fires, things like that. And the culture of Anagar. Do y'all remember who Anagar was? Anagar was a spiritual teacher, okay, that taught for, I think it was like 10,000 years after Andan Infanta. He was the first great spiritual teacher, and that was the concept of the first concept of somebody coming up with something along the line of a universal God or a universal Father. Okay?
It says here, one of the 24 counselors, too, spiritual leader of the pre-planetary prince age,
That's
Onagar.
right. He's on the council of the 24. And this is a the chart that we looked at before, and I just put this up so you could see where the Foxhall peoples are. They're after the beginning of the Andonic race. They're along the same time as the Java man in Australians, and the Foxhall people, and the Heidelberg race, which develops into Neanderthals. Okay.
And just one mention too, Roger, on the Foxhall peoples.
Yes.
First Annanites to settle in England.
That's right.
Yeah.
They were the ancestors, part of the ancestors of the blue and the white race, actually. So we are the descendants of the blue race, a mixture of the blue race, being white race. All right.
So Roger,
Yeah,
now this is saying 900,000 years ago
that's right.
these were vanishing. So I'm assuming that meant approximately 100,000 years had passed since Andon Infanta.
That's right. That's
And
right.
this brings us to this period now.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
It is. Okay, Millie, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay. Would you take the next one, please?
These were the times when large numbers of inferior mongrel groups were arriving in England from southern France. These tribes were so largely mixed with the forest ape-like creatures that they were scarcely human. They had no religion, but were crude flint workers and possessed sufficient intelligence to kindle fire.
So they were just barely human then, weren't they? Because of their mixture with the ape-like creatures. Okay? Keep track here and you'll see where the Neanderthals fit in here shortly. Alright? Who's next? I think Tim's next, isn't he?
They were followed in Europe by a somewhat superior and prolific people, whose descendants soon spread over the entire continent, from the ice in the north to the Alps and Mediterranean in the south. These tribes are the so-called, I can't pronounce that.
Heidelberg race. And these
Heidelberg
were named,
race.
Yeah, these were named by the Heidelberg race by our current scientists. Okay, just found fossils of this race. Okay.
Did the fossils really add up to 900,000 years ago? If they were dated?
I don't know if the carbon dating comes up with that or not, Tim, to be honest, but that's about when they were. You know,
But it
carbon
would be
dating's
hard
not
to prove that
exact.
though, right?
Huh?
Would that be hard to prove for a scientist?
It would be hard. Everything's hard to prove for a scientist. They think
That's correct.
many scientists that come up with a theory and they think it's a law, and actually it is just a theory. You know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Roger, I'm a little bit confused. The Heidelberg race, the superior and prolific people that followed, is it saying that after these ape-like people that came in from the south toward England, did they follow them, or?
No, they migrated on their own. Rodney, but eventually all these races, including the Neanderthals and later on, because of the Dalmatians, you know, they mixed in with this mix too after Calabasas fell, right? So all these beings intermarried with the colored races of the Sangic people eventually. So they were uplifted by the Sangic blood, that's what they're saying. And the Sangic blood was the direct descendants of whom? Andon and Fonta. So basically they went backwards, the Neanderthals were more backwards, but they were uplifted again by the mixture again of the Sangics, which was the descendants of Andon and Fonta. That makes sense?
Yeah, you mean the ape-like creatures that came from the south mixed again with the Andon and Fonta, the better blood.
Yeah, that's right. They mixed again. Those that had mixed with those ape-like creatures had mixed with the Sangic people, so they got uplifted again. So the mongrels eventually were taken back over by the better blood. But see, some of those tendencies still went down through history. See, that's part of the problem we have today, Rodney, is the fact that we still are so barbaric. And a lot of the barbaric tendencies that we have is because of this mixture with the apes and the Neanderthals. Okay? So we still carry those barbaric genes and barbaric tendencies. And if we would have gotten all of the infusion of the Adamic blood or the violet race, we would have had even less of that today. That's the whole point of this. So, and that was the mission of Adam and Eve, to do that. So, you know, and this is the story of our history, basically. Okay.
It's my turn.
Let me move on. I think you're up next, Rodney, if I'm not mistaken.
You need to move it up on.
Oh, did I need to move that one?
Yeah, I just got done
Okay.
reading Mark.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, during this long period of cultural decadence, the Foxhall peoples of England and the
Mennonite? Yeah.
tribes northwest of India continued to hold on to some other traditions of Andon and certain remnants of the culture of Anagar.
And this is very important. And Onagar remembers on the Council of 24, right? All right. Is it Dustin next? Yeah. Dustin?
Okay.
I got my book here, ready to do it. Okay. The Foxhall peoples were farthest west and succeeded in retaining much of the anhedonic culture. They also preserved their knowledge of flintworking, which they transmitted to their descendants, the ancient ancestors of the Eskimos.
And they were the ancestors of the red man, right? Okay, so that's what they're talking about here. This is basically a road map of where everyone came from. Dear?
Though the remains of the Foxhall peoples were the last to be discovered in England, these Andonites were really the first human beings to live in those regions. At that time, the land bridge still connected France with England, and since most of the early settlements of the Andon descendants were located along the rivers and seashores of that early day, they are now under the waters of the English Channel and the North Sea, but some 3 or 4 are still above water on the English coast.
Okay, so there's still 3 or 4 of the settlements of these early Andonites that are above water and that we could find their fossils, right? And that's what they're talking about here. The Foxhall people that's been discovered. Many of the more intelligent and spiritual of the Foxhall peoples maintained their racial superiority and perpetuated their primitive religious customs. And these people, as they later had mixed with the subsequent stocks, journeyed on west from England after a later ice visitation and have survived as the present-day Eskimos. So part of them migrated across, right, and became the Eskimos, and then the ice came back down.
It says they journeyed on west.
On west. Why would that be west? Because they were on the coast of England, so the ice would allow them to go across to the North Americas.
Okay.
You follow
So they
me?
traveled all the way into northern Canada.
Northern Canada, North America, all the way to Alaska, right?
Okay, cool.
All right. Okay. I think I'm next, right? The Bandanaun tribes. Besides the Foxhall peoples in the west, another struggling center of culture persisted in the east. This group was located in the foothills of the northwestern Indian highlands among the tribes of the Bandanaun, a great-great-grandson of Andon. These people were the only descendants of Andon who never practiced human sacrifice. So it was in India that there was the only tribe of the Bandanaun tribes, or the descendants of Andon, that did not practice human sacrifice. Okay? And their descendants are the populations of what? Tibet and India.
Maybe that's why they don't kill cows.
That's maybe something to do with it, Rodney. It may very well be. All right? Okay, let's see who's next. That's Millie, right? Millie, I think you're next. Turn your mic on, Millie. Hello, Millie. Have we lost Millie? Is she still online? Okay. Well, Tim, would you go ahead and read the next one?
These highland Bandanites occupied an extensive plateau surrounded by forest, traversed by streams, and abounding in game. Like some of their cousins in Tibet, they lived in crude stone huts, hillside grottos.
Grottos.
Grottos. And see, how do you pronounce that, Roger?
Semi-underground.
Say that again?
Semi-underground.
Similar granite passages.
Semi-underground. In other words, they were partially underground, not totally underground. They'd go in, come out, and go in, and come down. They were like little chunks out of the hillsides and stuff. And why would that be? Because it was very cold in the winter. They had lots of snow and things like that, so they would find shelter in huts and hillside grottos so that they would be protected from the cold in the winter and things like that. They'd have little fires, that sort of thing. So
That's incredible because when a documentary called Samsara, there is out of a piece of rock, there's all these little holes that people used to live in. It is just amazing. It's something like out of Star Wars.
yeah,
That
yeah.
it looks like.
Well, that's exactly what they're talking about here, right? Okay. Who's next? Rodney, I believe.
All right. All the tribes of the north grew more and more to fear the ice. Those living near the homeland of their origin became exceedingly fearful of the water. They observed the Mesopotamian peninsula gradually sinking into the ocean, and though it emerged several times, the traditions of these primitive races grew up around the dangers of the sea and the fear of periodic engulfment. And this fear, together with their experience with river floods, explains why they sought out the highlands as a safe place in which to live.
Yeah, so the ones that were afraid of the ice, it was because of their close association with the ice, right? And those that became afraid of water, it was because of the constant flooding of the rivers and the Mesopotamian Peninsula and things like that. Just like Dalmatia was sunk underwater, that's a perfect example of this, right? So it depends on what was at hand close to you. That's what you became to fear, right? All right. Oops, too far here. Dustin, would you take the next one, please?
Hi, Roger, he stepped out again.
Oh, did he? Okay. Diane?
To the east of the Badonin,
Bandanen?
Badonin peoples in the Sawalak hills of northern India may be found fossils that approach nearer to transition types between man and the various pre-human groups than any others on Earth.
And what are they talking about here? They're talking about modern man, or more like Andon and Fonda, and the various pre-human groups. All right. Well, what are they talking about? Those are those mixed descendants of Andon and Fonda that went back and mixed with the simians, right? So you would call them what? Pre-human, because they weren't quite 100% human, right? All right. Let's see here. Let me get
Is Millie still with us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. I came back. I
Great.
had a couple of things I had to go check on.
Let me get my math straight out here. Okay. 850,000 years ago, the superior Brandon tribe began a warfare of extermination directed against their inferior and animalistic neighbors. In less than 1,000 years, most of the borderline animal groups of these regions had been either destroyed or driven back to the southern forests. This campaign for the extermination of inferiors brought about a slight improvement in the hill tribes of that age, and the mixed descendants of this improved Bandonite stock appeared on the stage of action as the apparently new people, what? The Neanderthal race. Okay, you catch that? So this is where the Neanderthal race really started. And this was the upstepping from the Bandonite tribes of those inferior beings, right? Because most of them had been wiped out by these. I'm sure some of them creeped through, but most of them were gone.
So we could say that Neanderthals' ancestors were from Tibet or the highlands.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Now this is interesting how the Neanderthals take over most of the world. Okay? All right. Let's see. Millie, I think you're up.
Okay. Number 4, the Neanderthal races. The Neanderthalers were excellent fighters, and they traveled extensively. They gradually spread from the highland centers of northwest India to France on the west, China on the east, and even down into northern Africa. They dominated the world for almost 500,000 years, until the times of the migration of the evolutionary races of color.
Did y'all catch that? So the Neanderthalers, the reason we find so many fossils of the Neanderthal race is they dominated the planet for nearly 500,000 years. That's a long time, right? All right. And this is...
of course, we still have the Eskimos in North America,
That's right.
but they didn't dominate the planet. In other words, there were smaller...
There were pockets of other types of beings, Rodney, basically, that were cut off from them, right? And I'm sure that was true of the Australian Aborigines and things like that too. You know?
Right. It's just that the Neanderthals, when it says dominate, that just means that there were just so many of them.
There's so many of them that they pretty much took over the world. You know,
They took over the majority of the world.
That's right. That's right. Okay, and this is just, I've got a couple slides of pictures of what scientists think that they would look like during that period of time, okay? And it says that Neanderthalers were great hunters, and you can click on this link and find out more information about them, that sort of thing. And here's another one. You can see how they look more along the line of the high foreheads or the prominent foreheads, and they do look little bit more like apes than the normal humans, okay, and more slides of a typical family life, you know, and they're not much higher than the simians, you know, as far as humans go, right? And this is a chart from Square Circles. I thought I'd put it on here just to educate everyone, this is a pictorial view of the going from pre-man down through all the different types of men and where we came from. Okay, so if you think of Darwin's chart, this is a more corrected view of what Darwin's chart should have looked like.
That's really helpful, Roger. That's on Square Circle?
That's on Square Circles.
Where's that under? Is
Yeah.
it photos? Or?
No, it's just on their site. It's under study aids, I believe. They've
Great.
got a couple
Yeah, that's
really good
really nice.
charts. And this was made by, let me see if I can read this
I'll have them
gentleman's
printed
name.
out.
Sankin, I can't make it out, Para something. But he made this in 2003. But he's got a lot of good information on this chart. Go out there and either download the slides and take a look at this. You can see it a little bit better. Or go out to Square Circles and just bring it up. Also, there's this on Square Circles. And this is a breakdown of the family tree of races. And it's the same thing we've been studying in a different format. And it's a real good chart too. Just to, you know, when you peruse through this, you can spend days and days studying this stuff, how the different tribes came about and that sort of thing, all the way down to the 6 Sandic races right here. And right there on the 6 Sandic races, you see underneath that, you see the Princess staff, and then comes the Nodites. And the Nodites were the mixture of the Princess staff and the Sandic races. Okay, and then comes the Adamites later. That's when Adam and Eve arrived, and this is the violet race. And then it goes on about the Andonites, and this is the descendants of Adam and Eve, and where everybody came from. So it's just got some really interesting thing. Another chart they have on this side, the Squirrel Circles, is they have examples of human being pictures of all 6 of the Sandic races and what they look like, what area they live in. It's kind of interesting. So go out there and check that out for sure.
Roger, I know I missed something. What is the
Sandic races?
Races.
The Sandic races?
From?
They basically were the descendants of the Bandonites, and that's where all 6 of the colored races came from, is from the Sandic family. Okay?
The Sandics were from the
Sandic races, it's called. And they are basically, they had 19 children, and it's all 6 of the different colored races. And it includes the ones that's disappeared, like the green race and the orange race. Right?
Another way to put it, Rodney, is Sandic races, 6 colored races of Urantia, 3 primary and 3 secondary.
That's right. All right. Let's keep going. Who do we have next? Who just read? Somebody volunteered that they just read.
I'll read, Roger.
Okay, go ahead.
800,000 years ago, game was abundant. Many species of deer, as well as elephants and hippopotamuses, roamed over Europe. Cattle was plentiful, horses and wolves were everywhere. The Neanderthals were great hunters, and the tribes in France were the first to adapt the practice of giving the most successful hunters the choice of women for wives.
There you go. There it is. So if you were a lousy hunter, you didn't get a wife. All right, Rodney, would you take the next one?
Okay. Roger, I'm sorry. Before I read this, one more time here. The Sandic were descendants of the Bandonites,
Yeah.
and that's where the 6 color races came from.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah, the 6 colored races came from the Sandics. That's
So,
correct.
so that left out the Foxhole people, which were the Eskimos.
Pardon
Not
me?
of the 6 color races.
Yeah, well, that's the mixture of them, Rodney.
Okay.
The 6 color races. In other words, when the 6 colored races appeared, the descendants of the red man were the Eskimos. Okay? In other words, what we considered the red man, they were the Eskimos.
Okay.
You follow me?
All right. Now, the reindeer was highly useful for these Neanderthal peoples, serving as food, clothing, and for tools, since they made various uses of the hands and bones. They had little culture, but they greatly improved the work in flint until it almost reached the levels of the days of hand-done. Large flints attached to wooden handles came back into use and served as axes and picks.
Like that. Larger flints attached to wooden handles served as axes and picks. This is the type of flint they're talking about. These large flints would make excellent tools for them, right? And Andon had figured this out, hundred thousands of years earlier, but it was later on that the Neanderthal peoples figured it out again. Okay?
Oh, and hey, Roger, in the documentary,
Yeah.
they said that the flints that they used to use back in those times were just as sharp as a scalpel, like a doctor would use today. No
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah, and they did that by chipping it off and making it that way, right? Okay.
That's correct.
All right. Dustin, I think you're next. You still there?
Yeah, he's back.
Okay.
Let's switch positions.
750,000 years ago, the fourth ice sheet was well on its way south. With their improved implements, the Neanderthalers made holes in the ice covering the northern rivers, and thus were able to spear the fish which came up to these vents. Ever these tribes retreated before the advancing ice, which at this time made it most extensive invasion of Europe.
That's right. That's right. Now this is during the fourth glacier extension. Okay, and what they did is then chop out a hole in the ice to get the fish, just like they do in many parts of North America when it freezes over. Right?
Yeah, I've done it many times.
Me too. You
All
just
right.
drill a hole and
There you
put your
go.
bait in and wait.
It's the same principle.
Okay.
Okay.
In these times, the Siberian glacier was making its southernmost march, compelling early man to move southward, back toward the lands of his origin. But the human species had so differentiated that the danger of further mingling with its non-progressive simian relatives was greatly lessened.
Okay, because they were cut off from them, they didn't have as much opportunity to mix with them, right? Okay. 700,000 years ago, the fourth glacier, the greatest of all in Europe, was in recession. Men and animals were returning north. The climate was cool and moist, and primitive man again thrived in Europe and Western Asia. Gradually, the forest spread north over land which had been so recently covered by the glacier. And I have a picture of the land mass where you can look at all those if you choose to. Millie, would you take the next one, please, dear?
Yes. Mammalian life had been little changed by the Great Glacier. These animals perished in the narrow belt of land lying
Persisted.
between the ice and the Alps.
Persisted, Millie. They persisted in the ice, not perished.
I'm sorry. These animals persisted in the narrow belt of land lying between the ice and the Alps, and upon the retreat of the glacier, again rapidly spread out over all of Europe. There arrived from Africa over the Sicilian land bridge straight, tusked elephants, broad-nosed rhinoceroses, hyenas, and African lions, and these new animals virtually exterminated the saber-toothed tigers and the hippopotamus.
Okay, and that tracks all the animals. I apologize for not having any light. If y'all been at home watching the video, you may been watching just the screen and this guy talking in the dark. I apologize for that. So maybe you can see me a little bit better now. Okay. Right? No, Tim, I think you're next.
650,000 years ago witnessed the continuation of the mild climate. By the middle of the interglacial period, it had become so warm that the Alps were almost denuded
Denuded.
denuded of ice and snow.
In other words, it warmed up quite a bit, right? All right. Rodney?
All right. 600,000 years ago, the ice had reached its then northernmost point of retreat, and after a pause of a few thousand years, started south again on its fifth excursion. But there was little modification of climate for 50,000 years. Man and animals of Europe were little changed. Slight heredity
Yes.
of the former period lessened, and alpine glaciers descended far down the river valleys.
Dustin, can you take the next one, please?
550,000 years ago, the advancing glacier again pushed man and the animals south. But this time, man had plenty of room in the wide belt of land stretching northeast into Asia and lying between the ice sheet and the greatly expanded Black Sea extension of the Mediterranean.
So this is a constant thing of the ice moving down and back, and how human beings followed that trail because of the mass of the ice. Okay.
These times of the fourth and fifth glaciers witnessed the further spread of the crude culture of the Neanderthal races. But there was so little progress that it truly appeared as though the attempt to produce a new and modified type of intelligent life on Urantia was about to fail. For almost 250,000 years, these primitive people drifted on, hunting and fighting, by spells improving in certain directions, but on the whole, steadily retrogressing as compared with their superior Andinite ancestors.
All right, so the life carriers were discouraged because this went on for 500,000 years, right? And so it did not look good for the human race for a long time. All right, that's probably what they think about our race nowadays with all our barbarianism. You know, they're very patient with us, right? During the spiritual dark ages, the culture of superstitious mankind reached its lowest level. The Neanderthalers really had no religion beyond a shameful superstition. They were deadly afraid of clouds, more especially of mist and fogs. A primitive religion of fear of natural forces gradually developed, while animal worship declined as improvements in tools with abundance of game enabled these people to live with lessened anxiety about food. The sex rewards of the chase tended greatly to improve hunting skill. This new religion of fear led to attempts to placate the invisible forces behind these natural elements and culminated later on in the sacrificing of humans to appease these invisible and unknown physical forces. This terrible practice of human sacrifice has been perpetuated by the more backward peoples of Urantia right on down to the 20th century. So they consider this human sacrifice thing is backwards, right? And basically it developed out of fear of the unknown or superstition about nature. Makes you wonder, and it's going to talk about how they track the moon and the sun and that sort of thing, trying to get the moon to come back. It makes you wonder places like Stonehenge and these circles around the world where they've tracked the planets so exactly if it was not the development from this right here, right? Millie, would you take the next one?
Me already, okay.
Yeah.
These early Neanderthals could hardly be called sun worshippers. They rather lived in fear of the dark. They had a mortal dread of nightfall. As long as the moon shone a little, they managed to get along, but in the dark of the moon, they grew panicky and began the sacrifice of their best specimens of manhood and womanhood in an effort to induce the moon again to shine. The sun, they early learned, would regularly return, but the moon, they conjectured, only returned because they sacrificed their fellow tribesmen. Dumb!
Yeah.
As the race advanced, the object and purpose of sacrifice progressively changed, but the offering of human sacrifice as a part of religious and ceremonial long persisted.
And what's our Christian religion of Jesus based more on than anything else?
Without the shedding of blood, there can be no remission of sin.
You got it. That's what the whole Christian doctrine is about. And it should be a Christian doctrine about the life of Christ, not the sacrifice of humans.
That actually came from the tribe of the Hebrews.
That's
and then
right.
the Christians adapted it.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It should be about the gospel that
Should be about the gospel of Christ, right? That's right.
not about like we're
Not about the man, but about what the man taught.
about what he taught.
That's exactly right.
So when we say gospel, we're talking about the good news of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man.
That is the gospel in a nutshell, right? Okay.
Not the sacrifice of his son.
That's
in
right.
one.
That's right.
Yeah, it's confused these days. I ask people about that.
All right.
What's the gospel? It's like, well, that he died for our sins. It's like, well, wait a minute. He was preaching that before he died.
That's
How
right.
would that be the gospel?
And Roger, you gave it a fine explanation. I can't remember what paper about the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. That was just wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. And that is what this whole book is about, isn't it? This revelation is about the gospel. It's about the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Nothing else. It fills in all the gaps in our history that we've forgotten or we never learned, right? And it does that so we understand Jesus' message, which was what? The fatherhood of God and brotherhood of man. That's what this is all about. Okay, let's go on. Who's up next? Dustin? Is it, Rodney, did you just
I
read?
think I am.
Rodney, it's your turn.
And for some reason I haven't.
I just read it, it's Tim.
Oh, it's Tim. I'm sorry, Tim. I skipped over you.
Section 5, Origins of the Colored Races. 500,000 years ago, the Bedouin
Yeah, abandoned
tribes of
tribe.
the northwestern highlands of India became involved in another great racial struggle. For more than 100,000 years, this relentless
100 years.
Oh, for
What?
more than 100,000 years?
No, 100 years.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. 100 years, this relentless warfare raged. And when the long fight was finished, only about 100 families were left. But these survivors were the most intelligent, desirable of all the living, of the then living descendants of Andon and Fonta.
Okay, so when all the battle ended, there was only about 100 families left, but they were all the most desirable descendants of Andon and Fonta. And the reason being is they were the most intelligent. Okay, that's how they survived. Okay, now Rodney, I think you're up now.
All right. And by the way, I've got in parentheses next to 5, the origin of the colored races. I have page 584. I've got that in parentheses because back on page 584, number 4, halfway through the page, is about the 6 evolutionary races.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
ties together.
Yeah. It does.
Anyway, and now among these highland Bandonites, there was a new and strange occurrence. A man and a woman living in the northeastern part of the then inhabited produce a family of unusually intelligent children. This was the Sangik family, ancestors of all of the 6 colored races of
Okay,
Urantia.
All the colored races came from this family, okay?
Okay, now that answered what I was asking.
All right. All right, Dustin?
Check your books. Check your books. These Sangik children, 19 in number, were not only intelligent above their fellows, but their skins manifested a unique tendency to turn various colors upon exposure to sunlight. Among these 19 children were 5 red, 2 orange, 4 yellow, 2 green, 4 blue, and 2 indigo. These colors became more pronounced as their children grew older, and when these youths later mated with their fellow tribesmen, all of their offspring tended toward the skin color of the Sangik parent.
Now think about this. There were 19 of them, and it was only when their skin was exposed to the sunlight that this started to happen.
6.
They would change, the color would change, correct?
The color would change. That's
So
right.
there's 19 children,
19
one
children.
being pretty much those, where am I at? Blue, 2 black, red, yellow, and all these children's
and green.
colors. Let's take a red man for instance. He'd be out in the sun, and his color with his skin would start changing.
His skin would start changing red. That's
And
right.
that's what the black man, the yellow man, and the red
Black
man, and all
the
these
yellow
green
man.
men.
That's right. The skin, the sun's exposure would change the melanin in their skin to more of a hue of red, a hue of orange, a hue of green, that sort of thing.
Have you ever heard of anything like this where we can take it to like medical science? Is there anything like that known on your
Well,
ranch
yeah,
today?
you know, if I go out in the sun for a long period of time, I look like what? A red man, because I burn. Okay? Many people turn brown when they go out in the sun. They, you know, they're, instead of looking like a beet like I do, they actually start to tan. And I tan over time. I do get more of a different color over time. But initially, when I go out in the sun, I turn red. You know, and that's exactly what they're talking about here. Now, the interesting part is this: when they mated with other tribes people that weren't in their family, then their children had a tendency to retain that color more prominently. Okay, and over a period of time, that's where the colored races came from. All right. The other thing that happens is this. When you take an orange child and you mix it with a green child or an indigo child, then you get a different hue of color also. So, and all these mixtures of different kinds of colored stock people end up being different colors of people, and depending on the place in the world you go to, that prominence is very obvious. If you go to Africa, most of the people are indigo, right? They're black people, black men, or a dark shade of brown, right? And it's interesting that the black man literally conquered the orange and the green race. So some of their descendants mixed with the black race. So that may be why many black men are very black and some black men are a dark brown or a light brown, right? Because of the mixture of their ancestors. And it's the same way with white people, right? When you look at white people, some of us have a tendency more towards the olive skin. Some of us have a tendency more of a tan type skin. Some of us are the hue of very, very white. And others have that kind of a bluish tint to it. Have you ever noticed that? They get in the sunlight, and because of their veins and things like that, they have a tendency to look kind of blue. That's what we're talking about here. These tendencies are passed down through children, generation after generation after generation. Now, what's going to eventually happen? As we become more spiritually enlightened, we will start to remix with all colored races on a more frequent basis. Okay? And as we become closer and closer to light and life, eventually all the races will amalgamate into one basic color race again. Isn't that interesting? So it gets divergent to start out with, and eventually over millions of years it comes back to one race again. How about that?
And these 19 children, Roger, were just the parents of two, a mom and a dad, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So all the colors in the universe, or all the colors in our world, started out from these two Sangic parents. That's what's really
Color of the rainbow.
Yeah. All right. Diane, I think you're next.
And now I interrupt the chronological narrative after calling attention to the arrival of the planetary prince at about this time, while we separately consider the 6 Sangic races of Urantia.
Notice it says at about this time. It doesn't say exactly at this time. It says about this time. So it only gives an exact date on that. Okay. 6. The 6 Sangic races of Urantia. On the average evolutionary planet, you know what, dear, everybody? We have 2 sections left to this paper, and these are very large sections. Do y'all want to stop here and break this up for next time?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to go over it slowly and take our time and try to learn as much as we can, sure.
A wise decision, because these are very, very long. We're on slide 53 and there's 112, so this is about halfway through. Okay?
Well,
Yeah, however you guys want to do it, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I am too. This is a very interesting paper.
We just want to take our time and do the best we can.
Yeah, I don't want to rush through this because I think it's really important we understand this stuff, because it's going to step into the Caligasser Rebellion and that sort of thing. So we have a background for stepping into that, right?
Well, we have 30 minutes left, though.
We have 30 minutes, but
it's Justin here, and I would actually enjoy maybe just one more page or 2 paragraphs so I could still try to comprehend.
okay, that's fine. We can do that if y'all want to continue on. You stop me when y'all want to cut it off and take the rest of it up next time, okay? Because we got plenty of paragraphs on this. Yeah, so let's do the first couple. I'll do that.
Number 6 is several pages.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get started at number 6, and y'all tell me when you want to stop, and we'll cut it off there. All right?
It's 4 more pages.
Yeah. All right. The 6 Sangic races of Urantia. On an average evolutionary planet, the 6 evolutionary races of color appear one by one. The red man is the first to evolve, and for ages he roams the world before the succeeding colored races make their appearance. The simultaneous emergence of all 6 races on Urantia in one family is most unusual. So y'all understand what they're saying here? Normally the races appear one at a time over long periods of time. And us being an experimental planet may have something to do with the mix that caused us to have all 6 races appear in one family, right? So
do you think this section is going to offend a lot of people?
it might offend the other people, but
And could you respond to those?
yes, I'm going to respond to each and every.
Because there's going to be a lot of people kind of like offended.
Yes,
And
yes.
me,
And I'm going to explain at depth why no one should be offended at anything they mention about the 6 colored races.
And let's keep in mind, Roger, that the most important thing is that these revelatours are not human. They don't know what it's like to be human.
They don't.
And it's just like human beings picking out strains. And
That's right. They're telling us this matter-of-factly, right? They're taking us like cattle. You know, if you took a Hereford and another kind of cow and you mixed it together, they're going to call one superior and one inferior, even though they're both cows, right? And that's basically the way they talk about the human stock. And we just went through a bunch of this with comparing the Neanderthal with the Bandedon tribes, comparing those two, right? If you were a descendant directly from the Neanderthalers, you would be offended by what they say, right? And really, this is the normal mixing of races on a planet. No one should be offended because we're all, when we get to the mansion world, we're all considered equally, okay? So.
But one of the most important things too is that what came to my attention when I listened to lectures is that this happened. The date isn't it like thousands of years ago? It's not today.
500,000 years ago.
Okay, so this happened basically what the revelatories are doing is basing their superior stock and info 500,000 years ago, correct?
That's correct.
It's not for today's world, so you
It's
can't say
not
the indigo
from-
is not superior to the white man, etc. This
No.
happened 500,000 years ago, correct?
No, that is not true anymore. Why? Because we've had such an admixture of all the races down through time that you cannot really call any race superior. You really cannot, if you think about it. Because we're all what? We're all Heinz 57, whether you want to admit it or not. We've all been mixed with every possible colored race down through time. Every human being out there, just about. Okay? So if you think you're superior, I got news for you. You know, it's time for a real awakening. There are no superior races now, I would say. Period.
So Roger here, it's saying that it's unusual that this happened on your answer. However, I'm pretty sure it's saying that it has happened before.
It probably has happened before, Rodney, but it's very unusual for this to happen. And it may have happened on other experimental planets, Rodney, too, you know, that all 6 of the colored races come in one family, because they say it's normal here that the colored races appear in succession, one at a time, right?
It does put in italics. It says all 6 races of Urantia italics and in one family. It was most unusual. It could be that it's only unusual that they all came out of one family.
That's right. It's possible.
There are a lot of Africans that moved into Italy when I was in South Italy. If you think about the color indigo, that's the color of an eggplant.
Yeah. And
the Italians would call them the word they used for eggplant.
Right.
They would call them eggplants because their skin was beautiful. It was smooth. It was so dark. It looked like eggplant. So they were indigos. They were not mixed. They were just plain indigos.
That's right. Yeah. This is a map of the world of the 6 Sangic races, and the reason I wanted to bring this up and show you this is from Square Circles 2, I believe. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is this. Oops. Let me see if I can get my little mouse to work here. Of course it's not going to work. Okay. Well, do it again. Here we go. The 6th, let's go back one here first. The area they're talking about, the cradle of civilization, is here, right? Around Sicily and the Sicilian land bridge. And all these migrations they're talking about would go both this direction and this direction across the Bering Strait into North America, right? And to Greenland and to Iceland. Also all the way down to South America. So at one time or another, because of the glacier ice covering, you could go from England or Upper Europe right straight over into what? Greenland, Iceland, that area. You can come across that way, or you could go across the Bering Strait into North America. And what did this? Horses, elephants did this, hippopotamuses did this. So pretty much all of North America at one time had horses and hippopotamuses and elephants, you know, hairy elephants. All these things are possible. Also, if you look down here, all right, where Australia, at one time there was land that connected even Australia, right? how else would there be human beings down there, right? And who are the human beings down there? The Aborigines, right? They moved from island to island, that sort of thing, across the land bridges and the straits and where the water was not deep, that sort of thing, right? So when you look at this and you think about it, you can imagine all these pieces of land almost being totally connected at one time or another. Right? And we're talking hundreds and thousands of years, but that's why.
Yeah, that's a great visual, Roger.
It is. If you study this, you can actually, as they're talking, study out where each one of these groups migrated to and when. And that's what I was
like
talking
you
about.
said, the world of the six standing races, this happened 500,000 years ago?
That's right.
So that would have been in the time of the planetary prince, Caligastia, coming
That's
to
exactly right.
Urantia.
That's right. Also, this is another part of the slide of the chart, the Don Estes chart. And this breaks down on this side over here where all the Eskimo tribes come from. Basically, it talks about the pre-white Europeans, the Iceland Siberians, the Berbers, the Andinites. This is the Nubian Andinites, and it shows the Indigo race, the black Africans, right? It also shows basically the blue race and how they mixed with other races and that sort of thing, and where they ended up. You can see here how the yellow man ended up in East Asia, South China, early Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Pacific Islands. Then the combination of the yellow, red, blue, and orange man ended up in Mexico, Central and South America. And the red man, how he ended up in North America, right? And then it goes on, if you keep going up from this, you end up with the Adamites, the violet race, and how they mix with different races. So this makes a really interesting chart. And over on this side, what's really interesting about this, because this is the time of the planetary prince when these six races evolved, it has an arrow over to the Nodites, right? And who are the Nodites? They were the mixture of these races with the prince's staff that rebelled. Okay? So, when it talks about in the Bible how the Nodites went and found wives with men, well, they found them with all the races. Alright? But this shows the Andinites that were modified, basically, by the prince's staff. So it's kind of interesting. You could study this chart for a couple hours and not understand it all.
Hey Roger, isn't the Nodites also connected to Babylon?
Yes.
And the whole story of the Tower of Babylon?
Yeah, that whole, that's the real story of the Tower of Babylon was because they couldn't decide which god they were making the tower to, right? In the Bible, it tells us that they made it to, they were making it as a stairway to God, right? And that God didn't like it, so he destroyed it, right? But that's not what really happened. What really happened was the funds dried up because they couldn't decide on which God to make it to. So, anyway, it's a whole other story. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay. I've forgotten who's.
I am.
Okay.
The appearance of the earlier Andinites on Urantia was also something new in Satania. On no other world in the local system has such a race of will creatures evolved in advance of the evolutionary races of color.
How about that? So that makes us unique too. That's part of that experimental planet stuff, right?
But hey Roger, just a quick question. The 100 and the corporeal staff, didn't they teach boat making?
They probably did. They taught all sorts of things.
Correct.
But I'm sure that was part of it.
But I'm sure they would have learned that it would have been easier, to take like the drift versus the walking along the edges.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they would.
Right then.
All right. Now we're gonna start the breakdown of each race. And do y'all want to stop here and do this next time?
I'm going to go away now.
Yeah, it's 7:44.
Okay. All right, let's
We'll-
stop.
next week we'll have to start back at number 6.
Yes. Yeah. That'll be good. We'll start on right here at the red man. Okay, right after the pictures. So that'd be great.
Thank
let-
you, everybody. Good night.
Good night,
Bye.
Billy. You have a good night,
Good
sweetheart.
night, Billy.
And you. Bye now.
Bye.
Let's say a little prayer and we'll say goodnight to the folks at home. Father, thank you for bringing us together tonight and allowing us to learn our own history and refreshing our memories of things we weren't aware of. We pray that you'll help us take this to other people and make it part of our world too. We thank you and give you the praise in your son's Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us at home. Please come see us again. Turn up the video here. Put your phone there, dear. And